Chapter 1. The morning air carried the cool breath of the ocean as Pearl stepped onto the walking trail that wound through the grounds of Pearl's Haven. It was her time. Before the day filled with voices and needs and decisions, before the doors opened and people began to move through their routines, this was where she quieted herself. Barney, gentle brown and white pit bull, walked ahead, familiar and steady, his pace as unhurried as her own. Beyond the trail, Conception Bay stretched wide and patient beneath the early light. Kelly's Island rested low on the horizon, with Bell Island rising further beyond. The water moved gently, steady and untroubled. Pearl had already spent time that morning in prayer, seated by her window, her Bible open before her. One verse had stayed with her, not loudly, not insistently, just enough. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Proverbs 3:27. She hadn't tried to explain it. She had simply carried it with her. Barney slowed. Pearl noticed it immediately. He wasn't distracted. He had changed direction, toward one of the benches that overlooked the water. That was when Pearl saw her. A young woman sat at the far end, her posture closed in on itself, shoulders drawn slightly forward as though trying to take up less space than she needed. Even from a distance, there was a delicateness to her, something uncertain, careful. She sat very still, except for the small movement of her hands. And then Pearl realized she was crying, quietly. Pearl didn't hurry. She followed Barney's lead and took a seat at the opposite end of the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. From there she could see her more clearly. Tall, but carrying herself smaller. There was a hesitancy in the way she held her posture, something almost fragile, like a young fawn unsure of its footing. Barney stepped forward on his own and rested his head gently against her hands. The young woman startled slightly and lifted her gaze. Her eyes were soft and guarded. "He's friendly," Pearl said quietly. The young woman let out a small breath, her fingers hesitantly brushing against Barney's head. "I can see that. I'm Pearl." A pause. "Jessica." And just like that, the moment began. Pearl did not respond immediately. She had learned long ago that some words needed space before anything else could touch them. The sound of the water below carried gently upward, filling the quiet space between them. The slow rhythm of the bay seemed unchanged, even as Jessica's world had shifted so completely. Only weeks earlier, Jessica had been disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witnesses. Overnight, the people she had known her entire life had withdrawn from her. Friends no longer spoke to her, and family contact had become strained and painfully limited. The loneliness was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Jessica stared outward, her thoughts still tangled between what she had been told and what she was beginning to question. "They said I chose this," she whispered after a while. Pearl turned slightly toward her, but did not interrupt. "That I was the one who walked away." Jessica's fingers tightened just slightly against Barney's fur. "That I separated myself from God." The words lingered heavily. "And after a while," Jessica continued slowly, "you start to believe it, even when something inside you keeps saying it doesn't feel right." Pearl nodded gently. "That happens when people trust what they've been told more than what they've been shown," she said softly. Jessica looked at her, uncertain. "I don't even know what's true anymore," she admitted. Pearl drew a breath, not to correct, but to offer something steady. "There is something you need to hear clearly," she said. Jessica waited. Pearl's voice remained calm, grounded, not forceful, not urgent. "The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth." Psalm 145:27. The words stood quietly between them. Jessica did not respond right away. "They told me I had already done that," she said softly. "Separated myself." Pearl shook her head gently. "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God." Romans 8:38-39. Jessica looked down again, her voice smaller now. "What if I'm wrong, though?" Pearl did not rush to answer. The breeze lifted slightly around them, carrying the faint scent of lilac from further along the path. "Then you search," Pearl said finally. Jessica looked up. "You don't turn away from God by asking honest questions," Pearl continued. "You draw closer to him by seeking what is true." Jessica held that thought carefully, as though unsure how tightly she could hold on to it. Pearl watched her for a moment, then said gently, "Do you remember the Bereans?" Jessica's brow softened slightly as she thought. "They were the ones who examined the scriptures," she said slowly. Pearl nodded. "They received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true." The words settled differently this time. Jessica let out a quiet breath. "They weren't condemned for questioning," she said softly. "No," Pearl replied. "They were commended." A small pause. Something in Jessica shifted. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to feel that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't lost everything after all. The quiet settled between them, but it no longer felt heavy. Jessica's shoulders had eased, just enough to show that something inside her had shifted. Not completely, she was still uncertain, still careful, but there was space now where there had only been weight. She drew in a slow breath and let it out, watching the movement of the water below as if it might help steady her thoughts. "I don't know where to go from here," she admitted. Pearl didn't answer right away. She looked out across the bay for a moment, allowing the question to exist without trying to rush past it. "You don't have to figure it all out sitting here," she said gently. Jessica let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, though it held more uncertainty than anything else. "I don't think I could even if I tried." Pearl smiled softly at that. "Then don't try to solve everything today," she replied. Jessica glanced at her, listening carefully now. "Just take the next step." Jessica hesitated. "And what does that look like?" Pearl gestured lightly back along the trail. "Well," she said, "there's usually a kettle on at home around this time." Jessica blinked, slightly surprised by the simplicity of the answer. "I tend to make more tea than two people could ever finish," Pearl added with a faint smile. Jessica looked down for a moment, her fingers resting lightly in Barney's fur. "I don't want to impose," she said quietly. "You wouldn't be," Pearl replied. There was no hesitation in her voice, no obligation, just an open offer. Jessica shifted slightly, the instinct to withdraw still pulling at her, but something else pushed gently in the opposite direction. "I don't really have anywhere else I need to be," she admitted. Pearl nodded once. "Then that makes the decision easier." Jessica looked at her, searching her expression for something, expectation perhaps, or pressure, but there was none, only steadiness. "Okay," Jessica said finally. It was quiet, but it was certain. Barney lifted his head, as though satisfied, and stepped ahead on the trail without needing to be told. Jessica stood, brushing her hands lightly together, her movements still careful, but not as withdrawn as before. Pearl rose beside her. They began walking back along the path. The trail curved gently through the property, opening and closing with small turns that revealed different views of the bay. The lilac trees caught the movement of the breeze, their scent drifting lightly as they passed. Further along, the cherry blossoms cast soft shadows across the ground. Jessica noticed it all, not in detail, but in feeling. "It's peaceful here," she said quietly. Pearl glanced around as if seeing it again for the first time. "Yes," she said, "it is." They continued walking. No rush, no pressure, just the steady rhythm of movement. Halfway back, Jessica spoke again. "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to meet someone?" Pearl considered the question. "Sometimes," she said, "but I usually only understand it after it's already happened." Jessica nodded slowly. Something about that answer stayed with her. As the building came into view, Jessica slowed slightly. Pearl's Haven stood quietly against the landscape, its windows catching the light, its presence steady but welcoming. At the entrance, a simple sign marked its name. Jessica looked at it, then back at the surrounding grounds, the walking paths, the trees, the open space, the view stretching beyond it all. It didn't feel like a place she was stepping into. It felt like something she had been led toward. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, but for the first time since everything had fallen apart, she didn't feel like she was walking away from something. She felt like she might be walking into something instead.